So good morning, everyone, and welcome to Church in Ocean Park. So glad you are here with us this morning. And this morning, I'm really looking forward to because one of my colleagues from LMU is with us this morning. And so thank you, Dr. Sarah, for being here. And that we'll have a nice full introduction of Dr. Sarah when we get to that part in the service. Today we're remembering Kristallnacht, but also thinking about what it means for today. Why is there so much continuing anti-Semitism, continuing and continuing and continuing? So we'll start off. So everyone, please take a stretch. Glad you're here and you negotiated the time change. And we're starting off with a song by the group Osibisa. And that is Wayaya. Wayaya. And some of you might know it because Art Garfunkel recorded it on his solo CD. I think it was on vinyl at that time. So your part, if you want to sing along, just says, Wayaya, 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 sing it again now, Wayaya, 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 Wayaya. We are going, heaven knows where we are going. We'll know we're there. We will get there. Heaven knows how we will get there. We know we will. It will be hard, we know, and the road will be muddy and rough, but we'll get there. Heaven knows how we will get there. We know we will. Here comes that Wayaya part. Wayaya, 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 sing it again, Wayaya, 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 one more time, Wayaya, 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 Wayaya. We are going, heaven knows where we are going. We'll know we're there. We will get there. Heaven knows how we will get there. We know we will. Oh, it will be hard, we know, and the road will be muddy and rough, but we'll get there. Heaven knows how we will get there. We know we will. Then just that last part again. It will be hard, we know, and the road will be muddy and rough, but we'll get there. Heaven knows how we will get there. We know we will. Why, yeah, yeah. 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 Oh, oh, why, yeah, yeah. 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 Last time, y'all. Why, yeah, yeah. Why, yeah, yeah. Why, yeah, yeah. Why, yeah, yeah. Welcome and good morning. Welcome to the church in Ocean Park.
Yes, welcome all. My name is Joseph Hepburn, and I'm a member of the church in Ocean Park. We are all members. We are here to welcome you to this unique interfaith community that is dedicated to social justice. You may be wondering now, am I welcome? Am I really welcome? We are interfaith. So you are welcome if you are Jewish, if you are Muslim, if you are Hindu, if you are Buddhist, if you are Christian, atheist, or as a patient told me the other day, a religious atheist or something else altogether. You are welcome. You are welcome if you just came in from a protest march, if you aren't able to attend protest marches right now, or are confused in this climate about what to do. You are welcome if you miss Pride Month activities, or if you are participating in some that are online. You are welcome if you don't have a job, if you want a job, or if you are in trouble trying to secure the position that you need. We extend a special invitation to those who are single, married, divorced, gay, transgender, or dirt poor. We extend a special invitation to those who are just browsing, just woke up, or those who missed the time train but are now trying to get in. Welcome. We extend a special invitation to those who are over 60, those who are millennials, Gen Z, Gen X, baby boomers, or those who are too aged to be added to any classification. We invite soccer moms, tree huggers, latte sippers, vegetarians, junk food eaters. We invite you all, if you're having a problem, if you're down in the dumps, if you're distressed about the situation, if you don't like organized religion, we offer a special invitation to those who work hard and those who are trying their best. We invite those who are peers or both. We offer a special invitation to those who could use a prayer right now. We invite tourists, seekers, doubters, bleeding hearts. Oh, we invite you all. Welcome to the church in Ocean Park.
Thank you. Thank you, Chaplain Joseph. Welcome to the church in Ocean Park. I'm the minister here. My name is Janet Gollery McKithen. And we are diverse, so you might hear something that you disagree with on occasion. And if you do, just realize that your voice is just as important as the person who just spoke. And if there's something comes up that you'd like to reflect on more, please let us know that in the chat. Let's pause for a moment for a land acknowledgement. We, the people of the church in Ocean Park, recognize that we are sitting on stolen land. In Santa Monica, we, the settlers of this land, honor the Quiche, the Changwa, and the Chumash peoples. We acknowledge the harms of genocide, enslavement, forced assimilation, gender violence, the destruction of sacred sites, and the burial of historic truth about Indigenous suffering at the hands of U.S. colonial settlerism. We acknowledge also that we are in a land built on the backs of people who were brought here against their will and forced into labor. We apologize for the harm by pledging ourselves to work towards the protection of sites and villages. And we pledge ourselves to dismantling the oppressive structures that we live in, but that keep us from realizing true freedom. Let us pause for a moment in acknowledgement, discernment, and commitment.
So I think it's my turn now to sing. I'm going to sing Ose Shalom, which is a prayer for peace for the whole planet, for everyone. We need it so much now in so many places. Ose Shalom, Bimroma, Huya Ase Shalom Aleinu. Ve'al kol Israel ve'imeru amen. Ose shalom bimromav uhuya ase shalom aleinu ve'al kol Israel ve'imeru amen.
Beautiful. Thank you, Jean. Thank you, Jean. And now it's my privilege to introduce our guest this morning. And she comes to us like many do from the Loyola Marymount University. We're very lucky to have such a wonderful connection. Loyola Marymount is full of riches. And here's another one this morning. Sarah Emanuel is Assistant Professor of New Testament Studies at Loyola Marymount University. She is expert in the Jewishness of Christian origins and how the Christ-following movement shifted into a Gentile tradition. She has published 2 books, 6 articles, 3 book chapters with 2 on the way, 10 public-facing essays, and is the co-host of the public-facing podcast, Feminists Talk Religion. She also serves as an editor for the online journal, Ancient Jew Review. Sarah is currently working on her 3rd book, which is intended for a wide readership and tentatively titled Left Behind, The Apostle Paul on Jews, Gentiles, and Who Gets Saved. Sarah lives in serfs in Venice, and we're so excited that she's here with us today. Welcome, Sarah.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you, Dr. Kim Harris, for the invitation. I've been asked to reflect upon the recent anti-Semitisms showing up across the nation, and in particular, what we may have learned about that occurred in Los Angeles on October 22nd. A set of banners were held over the LA 405, and I'll share my screen real quick. Where it said, honk if you know, Kanye is right about the Jews. And then it cites 2 New Testament verses in its justification for this, this anti-Semitism. So I have 10 to 15 minutes to talk about something quite big that we could spend hours upon hours discussing. So I'm going to do my best to share as much nuance as I can within the time limit. I've been asked a lot, like, what does this mean? What are these New Testament verses doing here? And honestly, I really didn't think that I would be seeing these verses used in such a way in my lifetime. These are 2 verses that have been used time and time and again to justify anti-Semitism, and in particular to justify the idea that Jews are of satanic origins. So here's another image. This is just one among many depictions of Jews as satanic. So we need to ask, like, what are these verses? One is from the Gospel of John chapter 8, verse 44, and one is from the book of Revelation, chapter 3, verse 9. I'll start with John 8:44. This is the one that pops up perhaps more frequently and has been used in a variety of Nazi propaganda. One in particular I have in front of me right now. It's called The Poisonous Mushroom. This was published by the Third Reich, and it's a collection of children's stories to help German children, spot the Jew for, Jews of Eastern European descent, such as me. We are extra tricky and extra devilish because we can, go around the world and be perceived as white. So this is, a set of stories to help people learn how to spot the Jew despite their seeming whiteness. So look at their feet, look at their nose, look at their hair, look at their ears, look at their posture, so on and so forth. But what one in particular is called What Christ Said About the Jews. And in this this one, children's story, John 8:44 is quoted directly. So within John 8, you have the Jesus character talking to hoi Judaioi, which translates as the Jews. And in 8:44, Jesus says to hoi Judaioi, you are children of the devil. You are not Abraham's offspring, but instead you are children of the devil. And this children's book quotes it directly. Jesus called the Jews killers of men from the beginning. By that, he meant that the Jews in all times have been murderers. He said further to the Jews, your father is the devil. So it's a direct quotation from John 8, and we've seen it time and time and again, including in October of 2022. So let's unpack this. And then honestly, Revelation 3:9 takes just a sentence to unpack. It is much easier to dispel than John 8:44. So something biblical scholars really like to do, and I'll stop sharing my screen, is ask questions of historical context. Did Jesus really mean or think that Jews are children of the devil? When looking to the historical Jesus, the man who lived, breathed, and died, the answer that 99.9% of, I would say 100% of reputable scholars will say absolutely not. The historical Jesus would never call Jews children of the devil, or at least mean that all Jews for all times are children of the devil. Why? Because his name is Yeshua from Nazareth in Roman Palestine. He's of Jewish descent. He cared very much about his Jewishness. His earliest followers are Jews, those who wept at his cross upon his crucifixion, all Jews. And to even believe that Jesus is the Messiah is to fundamentally enter a Jewish conversation. It is to believe that Jesus is the Jewish king who will come to overthrow the powers that be and usher in a new world order in which the Jewish God is seen as the God of all people. So everything about Jesus's mission and everything about the earliest believers in Jesus as the Christ or as the Messiah, Christos is just Greek for Moshiach or Messiah, is Jewish. It's an entirely Jewish conversation, nothing else. And so then scholars are like, okay, well, if it's this Jewish conversation, like what is happening in this story? And a lot of scholars will look to what has been deemed ancient Jewish sectarianism. We have evidence that Jews in the first century of the Common Era, which is when Jesus was spreading his message of Jewishness across ancient Roman Palestine, was marked by difference in debate. Jews were arguing with each other about how best to be Jewish and often used heated rhetorical hardball to get their claims across. And this is also part of the broader Greco-Roman world. Orality is a vicious sport at this time period. And so Jews and their Gentile neighbors are engaging in really harsh wording to try to prove that their way of being in the world is the right way of being in the world. So Jesus calling, hey, you Jews, these particular ones with whom I'm conversing at this moment, you're doing it wrong. It's like you're a child of the devil. That's just using hyperbolic, harsh vocabulary to try to prove that his version of Jewishness is the right one over and against this other version of Jewishness. You can think about it in the way that, we're at a church at Ocean Park in Santa Monica on the west side. I don't know if any of us on the west side have heard someone hyperbolically put down East Siders of LA, like, oh, they're just like wannabe folks from Brooklyn, or those on the east side making a hyperbolic claim of those of us on the west side. Oh, we go everywhere in our sweatpants and we have no fashion sense. Like when we say things like that, oh, those East Siders, or oh, those West Siders, we're not meaning absolutely everyone on the east side or absolutely everyone on the west side. It's a hyperbolic claim to get a point across. So when scholars think about the historical Jesus, perhaps saying something like this, they typically land in a place of, oh, Jesus in no way can be anti-Jewish. He's Jewish himself, and he's just engaging in this rhetorical hardball. The problem is that Jesus didn't write John. The Gospel of John was written decades after Jesus died. And by the time this text was written, a man named Paul was circulating his ideas about how to be a Christ confessor in the first century. And Paul was a Jew as well, but preached his ideas to non-Jews. So was really trying to usher non-Jews into the conversation. And we can talk at length about why he might have been doing that. But for now, we just know that by the time John was writing his text, both Jews and non-Jews are part of this Jesus conversation. So it's all still a fundamentally Jewish theology. It's just that some are Jews ethnically in being part of it, and some are not Jews ethnically. Some are Gentiles in being part of it. It's possible that by the time John wrote his text, whoever John was trying to rhetorically distance a Gentile Christ-following movement from a Jewish Christ-following movement. Debates just were added and added and added in the Christ-following movement. It wasn't just Jews arguing with other Jews about how best to be Jewish. It was also Christ followers arguing with Christ followers about how best to be a Christ follower. And some of the questions that came up post-Paul were, is it best to be ethnically Jewish? And many said, of course, absolutely. Paul's letter to the Galatians showcases how much many people believe that the best way to follow a Jewish Messiah was to be Jewish yourself. And then others, such as Paul, was really trying to say, no, if you're Gentile, stay Gentile. And perhaps whoever wrote John is trying to advocate for Gentiles to stay Gentile, and perhaps even advocate for the flourishing of a Gentile Christ-following culture over and against a Jewish Christ-following culture. When it comes to that second set of questions, to what extent might this gospel trying to separate the movement from its Jewishness? We can't know. Like, we don't have access to this author's psyche, and he can't answer our questions. But oftentimes scholars will say, well, even if the author of this gospel was trying to rhetorically do some sort of separating, the theology is still fundamentally Jewish, and Jesus himself is not advocating for this kind of a separation. It wouldn't make any sense to him. So in that sense, many scholars who implement a historical critical method will say, this movement is a Jewish movement, and Jesus was a Jew arguing with other Jews about how best to be Jewish. John 8 can't really be used to claim that Jesus himself thinks that Jews are children of the devil, and therefore to many of them, it kind of dispels this argument that Jesus was anti-Jewish, and dispels the argument that one should even be using John 8 to justify modern anti-Semitism. Revelation 3:9 is much easier. It's an entirely mistranslation. Revelation 3:9 has a resurrected Jesus say to those who say they are Jews but are really not, you are synagogues of Satan. Interpretive history has claimed that this verse says Jews are synagogues of Satan, and it's been used in that sense. That's not what the line says. It says those who say they are Jews but are really not, you are synagogues of Satan. Many have argued that it's actually pointed at Gentile Christ confessors. The Gentile Christ confessors are the synagogues of Satan. Revelation 3:9 might be a contra Pauline Gentile following community. Both John 8 and Revelation 3:9 together show us the extent to which Christ followers in antiquity were arguing with each other about how best to be in this movement. Some advocated for it to be Jewish, some advocated for it to be Gentile. At the end of the day, Jesus himself would have absolutely in no way not wanted this to be part of a Jewish atmosphere. That would have been contra his entire outlook on the world. And so a major problem in terms of the use of these texts to justify anti-Semitism and to justify the idea that Jesus himself is advocating for it is biblical illiteracy. People don't know their history. They don't know the context of these sources. And I know I'm running out of time and I'm doing a lot of information very quickly, but I do want to add another point just to think about. I'm teaching a class for our majors and minors, our undergraduate majors and minors at Loyola Marymount University, and they just read a couple chapters by a world-renowned scholar who writes this kind of information for a popular audience. So he shares what we can learn from the historical critical method to a popular audience. And my students hated it. They hated what he had to say because of the tone that he used. They thought he was arrogant, and they thought that he was talking down to them. And, this really had me thinking a lot over the weekend, to the point I'm a gym rat, and I was working out late last night, like really wrestling with the difficulties of teaching Bible. I am saddened that my students can critically engage secondary sources in the way that they can and not engage the biblical texts in the same way. They can read for tone and they can say, you know what, this author sounds a little arrogant to me. How might that be shifting how I read the argument? I'm going to go ahead on a limb here and be brutally honest. Sometimes Jesus in the story sounds like an asshole, and students cannot see it. Jesus calls "Hoi Judaioi, children of the devil" in the Gospel of John. Is that historical Jesus? No, but it's the character Jesus portrayed in John, and he kind of sounds like an ass. And I think that we all too often try to sanitize the Bible. We all too often want our Bibles to be good, and we will do whatever we can to make them good. And so I want us to ask ourselves, whose voices have we erased in this sanitation? Whose voices have we flattened, right? These texts have been used to justify slavery, anti-Semitism, subordination of women, hatred of same-sex love. And there's a reason for that. And I don't know about you, but I'm getting really tired of cleaning. So I'll end there. And yeah.
Whew. Oh, thank you, Dr. Sarah. I know people are sort of formulating their questions and all. Oh my goodness gracious. I was writing to someone. I said, I'm glad we have a recording of this because I'm going to need to listen to this again. There you go. Whew. Okay, so everyone take a breath. And as we take this all in, yes, let's remember that so many people have been hurt by mistranslations and misuse. And so we'll listen to a recording that is really a lovely recording of Or Hadash. And you'll see a few people you recognize in this because we recorded this at Loyola Marymount. And then please be ready with your questions and thoughts for community sharing.
Wow. Thank you so much, Dr. Kim. And thank you so much, Dr. Sarah. Uh, I could listen to you for a very long time, and it is too bad we only had a few minutes because there's a lot of depth there, and it does remind me of when I was in seminary, and some people there had grown up in churches that were afraid to look at the Bible, actually, critically. And so they didn't have this, they had a bias towards the Bible that you had been speaking about. And some of them didn't stay in seminary. One of the people had a breakdown. So seminary is not, it's not easy for people who come in strongly with a strong bias to find out how the Bible in fact was actually written and put together, and who did it, and those kind of things are very, very difficult for people. So I really appreciate what you're saying, and I think we would love more time, but here we are at community sharing time. It's a time for people to make a statement or ask a question. So if somebody says something you'd like to respond to, Sarah, just jump right in. They may ask you a question, or they just may be making a statement. So we'll start with Joanne.
Yes, I think some of you have heard me talk about this before. I went to divinity school because I thought I wanted to become a New Testament scholar. And one of the things that I learned to kind of try to shorten all my exposure to how you deal with texts of ancient texts like that, is that a lot of New Testament scholars, well, everybody divides the Gospels. There's synoptic Gospels, which are the first three, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. John is not a part of that. And that's because John is an outlier in terms of trying to be at all historical. And even those who are talking about the synoptic Gospels, depending on who's writing the Gospel, it is their slant. And all of these were written, decades after Jesus died. So I think in my mind, what you see, if you're trying to find a quest for the historical Jesus, your best bet is the parables. And I think the sense one gets out of scripture in that regard is that Jesus was certainly not anyone who would be putting down a whole group of folks for any reason.
Thank you, Joanne. Craig?
Thank you for your piece, and it leaves me scratching my head in respect to any number of things, but to be brief, I'm wondering if indeed there is an origin for anti-Semitism. If so, does it have a spiritual base in that respect? And who would you say are the ones that most embrace this ideology of anti-Semitism, be it Jews, be it Christians, be it whosoever, Muslims? I'm curious as to where this originated from, who embraces it, and what, if any, is the Jewish response to it?
An excellent question. And I can actually name a remarkable book chapter that will unpack this more than I can in a couple sentences. It's a chapter by a scholar of the New Testament named Paula Fredrickson. She has the opening chapter in an edited volume, edited by her and Adele Reinhardt's, called, the book itself is called Jesus, Judaism, and Christian Anti-Judaism. And the first chapter by Fredrickson is called, I think, The Origins of Christian anti-Semitism or even the origins of anti-Semitism, but it basically answers your question, at least from her perspective through her research. But I do tend to agree with her. I think as the Jesus movement began to include more non-Jews, and it started to include those who thought that the best way to follow Jesus as the Christ was to do it in a non-ethnically Jewish way, I think that that was a really hard sell. I think it for a lot of people, it didn't make logical sense to not be ethnically Jewish and following Jesus as the Christ.
One other question, is this person Christian that wrote this, or?
The book chapter, no, she's Jewish, but she Paula Fredrickson converted to Judaism, so she wasn't born into Jewishness, so she has an upbringing that gives her a unique perspective. But I think as the movement started to get more Gentile and started to prove a Gentile worth contra Jewishness, oftentimes in order to sometimes it's easier to say why those who aren't like you are bad, as opposed to say why yours is the right one. So a way in which to try to prove this version's self-worth, they moved to anti-Jewish hate and anti-Jewish rhetoric. I'm thinking, for example, Marcion is one such person in antiquity. And what happened is that version won the day of the Christ following movement. And then people, as time went on, forgot the history of the Jewishness of the early Jesus movement. Augustine picks up on this. Luther certainly picks up on this. And then it's just kind of like snowballed. But I think it was from, I think people became anti-Jewish as a way to prove a particular self-worth. And it's unfortunate. And I do think a lot of anti-Semitism stems from a very particular version of the Christ confessing movement, as do many scholars, including Paula Fredrickson. It's also, and to answer your question of what do Jews do with it today, I worked at a synagogue in New Jersey for the entirety of my doctoral program, and they felt threatened. They were nervous at the fact that I was studying the New Testament. They'd be like, oh my God, why are you doing that? Like, why are you touching that? So, Amy Jill Levine is another Jewish New Testament scholar who really urges us to have these hard conversations. Many Jews whom I know are afraid of it and running away from it, but I think that we need to jump in and not be so scared.
Thank you so much. Gail?
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're muted, Gail.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. I have been so appreciative of these kinds of conversations, having been raised in a traditional Protestant community, though my father wasn't. I'll get to him in a minute. But I really had to go through, reading some of the historical Jesus scholars and to hearing these kinds of, to really kind of get so I could embrace Christianity, because how it was presented to me was not something I could. My father, it's interesting because my question was exactly what some of you said, your colleagues were. Here you are, a Jewish woman studying the New Testament. I'm curious about that. My father was a Christian who studied the Old Testament, learned Hebrew. So I know from his perspective, but I'm curious about yours.
Yeah, thank you. I get asked this a lot. There are only a small handful of us who are Jews who are in the field of New Testament studies. Yeah, I was just intrigued. I did not grow up in a community that had a lot of Jews. I was only amongst other Jews when I was at shul or Hebrew school. My public school, there were just 3 of us, across grades. Really, it felt like, at least. And I was always fascinated with Christianity. I would go with my friends to Bible study and sacrament meetings and church services. But what really intrigued me was sort of the one-liner, Jesus was a Jew, but
Yeah.
if you don't believe in Jesus as the Christ, especially if you are Jewish, like Jews are the proximate others to Christianity, so we become more so the target of this. But if you don't believe Jesus as the Christ, you will go to hell or something like that. I was like, how fascinating. How does this sentence make sense? And so I came to it from just intrigue. I was never trying to, and still don't try to dismantle Christianity or attack Christianity. It was just out of pure intellectual curiosity. How can Jesus be Jewish and be used to justify modern anti-Semitism? I just found that fascinating. And so I dedicated my life to studying that question.
That's amazing. Great. Thank you. Craig.
Thank you, Dr. Sarah. This has been really enlightening and enriching. And I can't help but, in this really fraught political time, think about the sort of founding and evolution of this country by well-meaning people who argued over how it should come about. And that argument has been going on for, 200 and some odd years. And that to some degree right now, there are people using a sort of limited reading of those founding principles, just like people are doing that to justify discrimination against Jews as a kind of one-dimensional reading to advance something that really isn't healthy and I don't think was intended. So it's a complicated thing enough to deal with sort of the origins and conversations that were happening about early Christianity, but it just, I don't know, maybe because there's too much of politics and election on TV, it brought me back to this moment as well. And I really just appreciate the presentation and the conversation this morning. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Greg. Jean.
Yeah, I too have really loved this conversation. Appreciate it. Especially in this election time, I've really been contemplating all this putting down of the other person rather than, and this is what Sarah was saying, is justifying one's own self-worth by putting down somebody else instead of talking about one's own assets. And at the same time, I have a bird feeding station outside our windows. We have 3 little stations, and sometimes we have 12 birds at a time. And there's a complete pecking order. You can tell which bird gets to choose where to sit. And there's a rectangular feeder that they like the most somehow, not the cylindrical one. And so they fight for position. And you can tell by their colors which one comes back and always dominates and gets to hone in on this other bird, and the other birds leave and they sit on the fence and so on. So I've been really contemplating this about animals, and we were talking about Sarah's animals, and she has one leader of the pack among her 4 or 5 dogs. And I remember when we had Little Bear, you probably remember him when I brought him to church. And he was a little Bichon Frise, a little fuzzy white dog. And one weekend we babysat his cousin who was named Popcorn. And Popcorn just took over the couch, took over the front seat of the car, the window, the whole thing. So I've been thinking, okay, so among people now, this is an animal instinct to show that I have power over you, that I am the top dog. But at the same time, the animals only have instincts and we have reasoning. And so we are the ones who have the power to change this. So I started to feel a little bit of relief there. And of course, it's such a fight. And this is what we talk about all year long. Kristallnacht was mentioned in the description of today, and that was when there were pogroms, and you know, the soldiers just came in and smashed people's houses. There were stories of children hiding under pianos while all of their furniture was being smashed. And it's called Kristallnacht, which means the night of breaking glass, because there was shattered glass on the roadways afterwards. And it's so horrifying to think of people wanting to show power so much that they will destroy other people. So there's no answer to it, I don't think, except just each one of us being kind to other people one at a time, and then doing these studies and publishing things and talking to each other. But we're the only ones who can make the changes. The animals are stuck in their instinctual patterns, I guess. Thanks.
Can I respond just really briefly? This reminds me, I do have one hopeful message about the Bible that that might be hopeful. I agree that we get into these modes of trying to prove ourselves and improving ourselves, hurting others. But there is something about the collective of that has become the Bible that I think is indeed quite beautiful, both on the Hebrew Bible side and the New Testament side. So as much as I push against a lot of what is in both of those testaments, the fact that neither testament has an essence, I think, is actually quite beautiful. There's no one single message of it at all. It's just multiplicity and complexity. There are so many different voices and disagreements across the testaments. And so the New Testament itself, there's no one essence. There's no one way of thinking. I mean, you have Paul advocating for one version of being a Christ confessor, and his arguments showcase that there are those combating him, and then Revelation combats him too. So I think that the New Testament itself, as the Hebrew Bible, it actually, as a collection of texts, isn't trying to dominate one voice over another. It's multiplicity within itself. It's dialogical. It's plural significant. It's all those fancy words to get at, holding difference and holding debate and going against the grain of one size fits all. And I think that in and of itself, by having difference, and the fact that it has different, it invites us as readers to disagree too. I think the fact that, like, we can go back and say, hey, I disagree. Like, my entire Torah portion when I was being bat mitzvahed was about, I was given Leviticus, like, eye for an eye. Like, that was the random passage that I was given. So as a 12-year-old, I went, to the front of the bima and I just tore it apart. I hated it. And it was a very Jewish thing to do, right? To wrestle with these stories, but the stories themselves as a collection invite us to do the same. They're wrestling with each other across texts, and we can wrestle too. So I think that in a sense is actually quite a beautiful message. Like, if there is an essence, the essence is that there is no essence.
Yes.
Yes, I love the fact that you bring up the disagreement and the conversation, and the fact that there is no one truth, because in a lot of Christian traditions, they say the opposite, which is completely irrational and illogical if you read the text. So thank you. Rachel?
Thank you so much, Dr. Sarah, for your words. They definitely make one want to contemplate. I myself am Wiccan with a Christian background. And it's funny that you said what you just said, when the first thing on my notes here is that if you boil down the New Testament, in my mind, Christ has two messages. One is to worship the Lord. The other is to treat others as you would want to be treated. That was his way of boiling down the 10 commandments to just two. And if you live within those two commandments, you can have a better life and potentially reach the kingdom of God.
Thank you. Thank you, Rachel.
When,
I think, go ahead.
The problem comes in, I think, and it's to what you were talking about between the new Jewish folks following Christ and the old Jewish folks, where there's an argument between, and there still is to this day, between there's only one true way to and only one true God. But if you look at almost every religion on the face of the planet, including Hinduism and Buddhism and all of them, that it's all the same God. It's all the same universal cosmic energy. And the only reason that I could find for the villainization that you spoke about of other folks, of other religions, is as a means to attain, consolidate, and retain power over others. And that's where the dogma, the church dogma, comes in as a way of consolidating that power, so that that can be a means by which to, I mean, one question is, is their faith so fragile that they absolutely have to have all these other people following them to give credence to, validation to what they believe? And to me, when it comes to a spiritual relationship with that universal energy, that is a very personal thing. I believe Jesus said, or somebody said, that you should not be out in the public square praying. And so when it comes to these anti-Semitists, I think that a lot of that plays into it, in that they're looking at ways of retaining their privilege over others, and will cherry pick the dogma out of certain texts to validate their point of view, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. I think we have 4 more people, and I think that's probably good. So let's go with Linda.
Thank you. I mean, there's so much in this, and I don't want to repeat everybody else. But obviously, one of the things that I found really helpful was remembering some of the things that I learned as an undergraduate study. I was a religion major as an undergraduate at Pomona College a very long time ago. And it's, that the Bible is a collection of books written by some people. And I think, I realize it sounds pretty obvious, but it is something that certain folks tend to forget. And I teach history now at East LA College, and I have my students every week look at primary source documents, right? And they have to look at point of view and audience, and they have to summarize it, and they have to pick out a quote, and they have to talk about what was going on at the time. They have to look at what they have to at least suggest what other primary source documents would be useful to corroborate what they're seeing. And I mean, that's what you do with a primary source document. And if you look at if you look at the New Testament as primary source document, then then you ask those questions. What I want to just mention what occurs to me, and I think this echoes some of what other people, including Gina and also Rachel have said, is I want to look at the historical context for the banners being on the 405. And I want to share, I mean, I think part of the historical context is a growth of the fascist movement in this country. This is a Nazi poster that conflates Jews and communists. It says victory, victory over Bolshevism, and the communist is an anti-Semitic stereotype trope. It's I don't want to think about that very much. I don't want to look at that a lot. I think I'm going to this one better, because that's what I want to say. Is that we're in a political context in which anti-Semitism is part of the development of a fascist movement in this country, around the world. I mean, it's the 100th anniversary of Mussolini's march on Rome, when one of his political descendants has become, elected prime minister, or whatever, in Italy. And I think that at some point we need to talk more. I mean, all of these conversations are really important, but I think the answer to this is solidarity and struggle. So I'm gonna leave that virtual background up.
Thank you. We appreciate that one. Chris?
Yeah, I want to appreciate, Sarah, you sent me to my Bible, which my grandmother had given, so it's pretty old. And I wanted to just underscore and affirm a little bit of what Joanne said, and of course, what was just said by Linda, that the context means everything. And biblical scholars say in the book of Mark, we get Jesus as the Son of Man. In the books of Luke and Matthew, he's the Son of God. And then in John, he just runs around telling everybody he's God and pissing everybody off. And it wouldn't be his personality type, presumably, to have done that. But the way that the stories of his encounters in the temple come about, yeah, they're having a brawl. And this narrative takes place inside a temple where he's being very aggressive and responding to their accusations that he's just a bastard, he didn't go to school, he's not worthy of anything. And then he is just ramping it up and saying, and again, this thing about devil and demon and the overlay with early shamanism and the idea of the Greek diamond, that we do have people that become our better persons, that talk through us. And there's a whole lot of complexity there that I find really quite fascinating. And I want to thank you for sending me to my Bible.
Thank you, Chris. Adana, you had your hand up and then you it popped off. Would you like to talk?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
I think pretty much what everyone says, I can relate to. For me, the Bible is a metaphor, and it's based on where you are at in your life. Sometimes it speaks to you, and that's how I look at it. I'm a lover of Jesus Christ, and I know he's a lover of the world. So when I read the Bible, there's a meditation that I take to get there, so I could have full understanding of what that looks like for me based on where I'm at in the world.
Mhm.
And so, just what I want to say, because metaphor, it doesn't mean that it's true, but based on your journey and your walk,
Mhm.
it can relate to you in that moment in time. And that's my take on that. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that, Donna. Thank you a lot. Chaplain Joseph?
Yeah, there's really a lot to say, but I would just say that it is always very troubling when we take passages out of context. Very troubling, and it brings us into a lot more problem. I think what is happening here is that Jesus is trying to take us beyond the context. He's trying to take us beyond the context. He's talking about his relationship with his father. It goes on to talk about his relationship with his father. And it goes on to say, before Abraham was, I am. He has taken the whole thing out of the context. And he is saying that just as the father and I have this relationship, if you see me, you see him. It means that we should, in our relationships together, even though Jesus is in a different context that his father is in, we should, even though we are in different contexts and different relationships now, we should relate with each other and deal with each other as Jesus deals with his father. So it's a sort of relationship context that Jesus is trying to paint to us, and not the context that we are trying to fight one another in. You understand? So that's how I look at some of it.
Great. I love the different perspectives. I love because it all brings nuance. And that's one thing that I love about the church in Ocean Park is that we hear from all these voices of different perspectives that only can, to me, add richness to my own understanding and my own belief. And I find things in different people's perspectives that I agree with, and then some that I think, well, I'm not so sure about that, but this is a wonderful, I hope that happens for other people in this community, because that's one of the gifts I think that this diverse community can bring. And somehow we get amazing speakers like Sarah, Dr. Sarah. And I just, that always amazes me that happens. But thank you so much, Dr. Sarah, and thank you everybody for your sharing. And we're going to have we also have amazing music. And now we're going to hear from Jean Gasca.
I'm going to sing a prayer called Mishaberach, which is a prayer for healing. It's a prayer for the complete healing for a person who is ill or suffering. And of course, we have so much suffering around the world right now and in this country. And one thing I like about the way that this is interpreted is that there is also a prayer for the caretakers of the person who is ill or suffering, the parents, the family, the religious leaders, the doctors and the nurses. And so it's an all-encompassing prayer. In the middle of the two verses of this prayer, I'm going to sing it as a nigun. And I'd like you, if you care to think about someone that you know that needs healing, and maybe think about that for just a few moments. Mishaberach Avotenu Mechor habracha limotenu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen. Lie, 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 lie. Lie, 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 lie. Lie, 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 lie. Lie, 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 lie. Lie, 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 lie. Lie, 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 lie. Mi sheberach imotenu mekor habraha lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shelema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen.
Thank you, Jean.